Hi, I'm Ben Canning, and this micro lecture is on speed. As always, you need 3 or more bullet points worth of notes, a 1 to 2 sentence summary on, and then your follow-up questions on the Google form. So the technical definition of speed, and you've probably heard this in a previous math class or something like it, is the rate of distance per unit time. Now, speed is a rate or an example of a rate, but it's not the only rate. So keep in mind that in this class, we'll use the word rate for many different things. But speed is literally distance per unit time, or kind of more colloquially or kind of informally, just how fast you're going. Now, distance per unit time kind of tells us what the equation is going to be for it. So here, if we have rate of distance, that's going to be on top. Per just means the division symbol or fraction symbol, and then unit time just means divide by time after. So that gives us the formal equation of distance divided by time is what speed is. Now, you might be thinking, let's use s for speed to represent it as the variable, but in physics, we're actually going to use v, and that's because we'll talk about velocity more often than we'll talk about speed, and they're almost the same thing, although not quite the same thing, so we just use the same variable for both of them. So v can be speed or it can be velocity. Here, though, v is speed, and it's going to be distance divided by time, or d over t. Now it'll be slightly different when we talk about velocity, and I'll explain that in a second, but here's the info for that. Also, we measure it in units of meters per second, which can also be represented as ms to the -1. That's still the same thing as a meter per second. So I talked a little bit about speed and velocity being similar, but not quite the same thing. So just a quick intro, we'll talk more about this in the future units. But speed is just a number with units, for example, 2.5 meters per second or 55 miles per hour, versus velocity has both the number and the direction. So we would have 2.5 meters per second north, or 55 miles per hour east, or 55 miles an hour down, or up, or left, or right, or things like that. And that's because one's a scalar and one's a vector, but more on that later. Also, please note that speed is always positive since the direction doesn't matter. But with velocity, if we ever talk about it, positive velocity will be one direction, and then the opposite direction would just be a negative version of that velocity. So you could have negative 2.5 meters per second, and that would communicate the direction. That's it for this one. 3 or more bullet points worth of notes, 1 to 2 sentence summary, and then make sure to do the follow-up questions on Google Forms.